The adoption of Kenya Independence Act 1963 led to the declaration of Kenya's independence. Secretary Duncan Sandys presented the Kenya Independence Bill 1963 before the British Parliament. It was created in the 1963 Legislative Lancaster House Conference. According to the bill, Kenya wanted to go to independence as a monarchy. After the Declaration of Independence, Kenyatta became Kenya's prime minister and head of government. This means, Kenya did not have a head of state, and so the government wrote to Queen Elizabeth II, asking her to be Kenya's head of state, but the request was declined. The British government had been involved in the administration of Kenya as a protector. This means that was not a British territory and so it was never under the jurisdiction of the British government. After the Mau Mau Civil War, the rebels who fought under the Kenya Land and Freedom Army decided to secede and to have their own governments. In 1959, the Afrikaners in the Rift Valley led by Michael Blundell joined alliance with their KAMATUSA squatters led by Daniel Moi and created the KADU government as the administration of the autonomous Rift Valley state. The KAMATUSA lived in the regions previously allotted to the East African Syndicate in the North Rift. Certain Afrikaners who had acquired ranches in the Protectorate tried to merge them to the territory of the Syndicate to create the Rift Valley State. During the First Lancaster House Conference, two other Afrikaners movements joined Michael Blundell's party in the call for self-rule. The Dutch and Irish Catholic territory of Kabatondo emerged as a monarchical state under Oginga Odinga. He first claimed the title of the chairman of North Kavirondo Local Native Council. He also became Kur of Joe Kavirondo in 1947 and chairman of the Luo Council in 1952. At the end of the Mau Mau War, Oginga Odinga began to claim kingship around 1957. This was confirmed in the Lancaster Conference and ruled as a monarch in the period that followed, known as the self-rule era. The Scottish Afrikaners in the Mount Kenya area wanted the Church of Scotland to continue ruling that part of the colony through Kenya-Africa Union. Once Oginga Odinga's monarchy was confirmed, he moved swiftly to repossess all that belonged to the previous king and the community. He transferred ownership of all that he had x3c. D. B. The economic wing of the Luo Union. Kisii was added to Oginga Odinga's Kavirondo kingdom because populations from Kavirondo had been resettled there, and so Kisii was called South Kavirondo. Oginga Odinga appointed Johnson Karaggio as the president of Southern Kavirondo. To get hold of the king and community's property in the Rift Valley, Oginga Odinga transferred the administration of the native territories in the Rift Valley to Daniel Moi, who now agreed to work as a president under Oginga Odinga. Moi and Karaggio established the provincial boundaries between Nyanza and the Rift Valley. The Protectorate administrators were alarmed by the looting spree presided over by Oginga Odinga. It was clear that Oginga Odinga was in a mission to impoverish the natives. Oginga Odinga was made king of Kavirondo, a region of the Kenya colony. In 1922, after John Ainsworth's de facto colony over the Protectorate was scrapped, the Kenya colony was established over the Uganda scheme, and placed under the Protectorate administration. At the point, Kenya became a colony within the East African Protectorate. The Afrikaners began to push desperately for a separate administration of the Kenya colony, and chose their own to act as chief native commissioner under the governor who was the head of the Protectorate administration. The Afrikaners YYGGYG created the Colonist Association whose chairman would be the chief native commissioner. They claimed to represent the imperial government. Back in Britain, there was a conflict of supremacy between the parliament and the monarchy. The last chairman of Colonist Association was Armeagle Wade, who held the position of chief native commissioner from 1931 to 1940. The British Parliament claimed YYGT Britain was under a constitutional monarchy, and so the king was subject to the parliament. However, the Protectorate administration was established as a result of traditional relationship between Britain and East Africa, and the Protection Agreement was not an act of parliament. The Agreement of Protection was implemented by the Convention of Associations whose members represented the British monarchy in the cabinet of the Protectorate administration led by the Governor. Representatives of the native authority were also members of the Convention of Association. The last chairman of the Convention of Associations was Lord Errol. Lord Horwick. Sir Evelyn Baring may have held that position during the Mau Mau War. The Legislative Lancaster House Conference of 1960 to 1961 created the Self-Rule Constitution which virtually separated the colony from the Protectorate. While the colony was divided into 3 autonomous regions, the Protectorate remained under the Protectorate administration headed by Malcolm MacDonald. He was not acting head of state on behalf of the British monarch. The Prester John, who died in 1940, was the one who made protection agreement with Queen Victoria. His son had not officially inherited the king's throne, especially after the chaos that followed the assassination of Lord Errol. For this reason, Malcolm MacDonald was acting as head of state on behalf of the Prester John's heir and the native authority. Oginga Odinga was doing all he could to disinherit the prince, and shocked even the imperialists, leading to Michael Blundell's infamous, cultural misfit, remarks. The Legislative Lancaster House Conference created the Kenya Independence Bill where they retained the traditional monarchy, but scrapped Oginga Odinga's government. He felt that if he was not going to be the king, no one else would. Initially, Kenyatta claimed to be of blood relations with the king, but it turned that Kabarega, who was claimed to be his father, was the Prester's chief vassal in Bunyoro. Kabarega was confused with Karega, which was the Badaro's name for the Prester John. Karega left Bunyoro, proceeded to Buhaya, campaigned across Tanzania and briefly camped in Musoma before crossing into Karungu area of the Nyanza region of Kenya. From that point on, Nyanza was also called Ugaya. He landed in Kisumu in 1901, operated around Dagoretti, Juja and Nagong with the decade. It was around that time that he married a daughter of his vassal in Ukamba, Wayaki Wahenga, king of Ukamba, and they had a daughter called Anne Nyokabi. Ngina, whom Jomo Kenyatta married, was the daughter of Anne Nyokabi. Through this marriage arrangement, in which Oginga Odinga was heavily involved, they hoped to block the male line descendants of Prester John from claiming their inheritance. Owing to the fact that the male line's existence was confirmed, Kenyatta could not be crowned as king after the Declaration of Independence. This is why Kenya government wrote to Queen Elizabeth asking her to be Kenya's head of state. She declined, and it is not clear how the monarch was expunged from the Kenya Independence Act to allow creation of the republic. With the declaration of the Republic in 1964, Kenyatta was made head of state and president of Kenya. Oginga Odinga retained his authority though he operated as Kenyatta's vice president. During that period, the regional governments were transformed to local governments, and the regional heads still reported to him. While Oginga became head of the local government, Kenyatta adopted the colonial system and divided Kenya into provinces, and installed colonial administrators, even in the regions of the Protectorate where the colonial system had never worked. In the days of John Ainsworth, he was the chief native commissioner and provincial administrator. He appointed district and divisional administrators, and village headmen as the lowest administrative unit in the colonial system. In Nyanza, the colonial administration appointed chiefs and headmen where Kavirondo populations were settled. The native authority in the villages never reported to chiefs or headmen, as they were native leaders who only reported to the king and his cabinet. The king and his cabinet had representatives working with the Convention of Associations who ran the Protectorate administration. The local Native Council was established by John Ainsworth to harmonize the operations of the native authority and of that of the colonial administration wherever the foreigners settled closer to the natives. Even though Ainsworth and his colonial administration enjoyed support of the British Parliament, they were not official representatives of the British government and the policies they introduced were not known to the British government. For instance, John Ainsworth introduced the Native Reserve Policy. The implementation of this policy attracted drastic reaction from the British Parliament, which led to the birth of politics of activism. John Ainsworth recruited Nubian and Indian police officers and deployed them to the native settlements alongside their counterparts recruited from Kavirondo. Their sole mandate was to implement the native reserve policy in a forceful manner that reduced the natives to conditions no less than slavery. Their land was alienated and distributed to the Indians and the Afrikaners. They flogged as they forcefully driven from the native reserves, to work in the alienated land as slaves and return to the reserves. This became the so-called forced labor. Lord Delamere complained to the British government about reintroduction of slavery by Ainsworth and his associates. Certain elements in the British Parliament rejected Lord Delamere's report, but the King and his cabinet treated it with a lot of seriousness. John Ainsworth and associates were banished from East Africa. Edward Northey was recalled and redeployed in the army. The Protectorate was reinstated while the Uganda scheme transformed into colony. Consequently, it was put under colonial administration known as direct rule. The Devonshire White Paper Command of 1922 records the British government's position regarding the Indian question, and the interests of the natives. This change of policy led to the birth of Kavirondo movement, through the foreigners agitated for similar treatment as the natives. Later on, Oginga Odinga became the leader of the Kavirondo movement and worked his entire to reverse all that was put in place by the King of Britain to protect interests of the natives and spearhead their advancement. Oginga Odinga's political activities and dominance in the affairs of the natives produced the exact opposite of what the king envisioned for the natives.